The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors. I was coming out of anesthesia, still groggy, when I heard them talking just outside my curtain. If she died right now, the trust clause would activate. Everything would go to us. She doesn't even need to know she's already signed half the documents without reading them. My aunt's voice was as casual as discussing the weather. My father, the man I'd called Dad for 15 years, just hummed an agreement. I kept my eyes closed and listened to them plan my financial funeral while my surgical wounds were still fresh. That's when I understood what I'd been feeling for years but couldn't name. I wasn't their daughter. I was their investment. My name is Ayana. I'm 23 years, and I've been their perfect, quiet little secret for long enough. Growing up, I was always the delicate one, the sensitive one, the one who doesn't need to know everything. Love came with restrictions, polite gestures, quick hugs, vague explanations. Every time I asked about something, finances, inheritance, even household decisions, I heard the same response. Don't worry about that, you already have enough. I called it the quiet book, not because I was quiet, but because it listened when no one else did. A small red notebook with a blue elastic band where I started recording the things that didn't make sense. I remember being 12, trying to read a letter addressed to me. Mom appeared instantly, sliding it away before I could see more than my name. Some things can wait, she said, but her smile never reached her eyes. Maybe she's protecting me, I told myself. Maybe I really am too young to understand. The first crack came when I was 17. I caught Dad whispering to Aunt Sarah. She's been asking questions lately, more than usual. Sarah glanced at me, then back at him. Just keep redirecting. She doesn't need to know how the machine works, just live in it. That night, I opened the quiet book to a fresh page. Not because I didn't trust them, I did, but because something in their eyes when they looked at me felt calculating. Page 1. Why do they look nervous when I ask about my own life? 3 months later, Mom had too much wine at dinner. She looked at me across the table and said, "You have no idea what we sacrificed to have you here." I wrote that down too. Because when people slip, they often tell the truth. The pattern became clearer as I got older. Questions about college tuition were met with vague promises. Requests to see my own bank statements were deflected with lectures about gratitude. When I turned 18 and asked to open my own checking account, Dad said I was too immature to handle money, but I was mature enough to sign documents I never read. Papers that appeared at the kitchen table with cheerful explanations. Just updating your beneficiary information, honey. Standard stuff for someone your age. I signed them all, because that's what good daughters do. Page 12. Why do they only call me mature when they need my signature? By 19, the quiet book had 47 pages of observations, overheard conversations, and the growing suspicion that love shouldn't feel like a performance review. The machine worked perfectly as long as I stayed quiet. But machines break down when you start asking how they work. Sunday morning, I asked if I could attend the family meeting with their lawyer. The request was immediately dismissed with patronizing smiles. When I insisted, Aunt Sarah's voice turned syrupy. "You're wonderful with art, sweetie. But this is grown-up business." But grown-up business had a way of spilling into conversations they thought I couldn't hear. That afternoon, I was reading in the hallway when their voices drifted from the kitchen. "She's going to figure it out eventually. And then what? By then she'll have already signed everything we need." Dad's voice was tired. "What if she stops signing?" "She won't. She always does what she's told." I sat frozen, my book forgotten in my lap. The casual certainty in their voices was more chilling than anger would have been. They weren't worried about my feelings. They were worried about my compliance. Page 23. They're not protecting me from something. They're protecting something from me. The breakthrough came during a family dinner when Uncle Mark had been drinking. He looked at me with something approaching disgust and said, "You should be grateful you're in this house instead of asking so many questions." The table went silent. Sarah's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. "Mark," she warned, but he continued. "She lives like a princess in a castle she didn't build, eating food she didn't buy, asking about money she didn't earn." I excused myself and went to my room, but I could hear them through the thin walls. "Who pays decides, and she doesn't pay anything. If every question becomes an attack, then the answer is dangerous. She signs without reading. Always has." I realized something that night. They weren't raising a daughter. They were managing an asset. And the more innocent I appeared, the more honest they became around me. So I started playing dumber. I smiled more, asked fewer questions, pretended not to notice when conversations stopped abruptly when I entered rooms.It worked. Within weeks, they were relaxed around me again. And that's when I heard the real conversations. Page 31. The quieter I get, the louder they become. The most revealing moment came from an unexpected source. My 8-year-old cousin Tommy was visiting, and kids have no filter for adult secrets. During lunch, he looked at me with wide eyes and asked, "Are you really going to give them the house when you turn 21? The adults froze. Sarah grabbed Tommy's arm. That's not how it works, honey." But Tommy persisted. "The way children do. Mommy said Ayana has to sign papers to give you guys the house. She said it's like a present." The silence was deafening. Finally, Mark cleared his throat. Children misunderstand adult conversations, but children also repeat exactly what they hear. And what Tommy heard was that I was supposed to give them something worth 20 years of careful management. Page 38. Even the children know what I don't. At 19, I discovered that all my personal documents were stored in a safe registered under Uncle Mark's name. When I asked why, the temperature in the house dropped 10 degrees. Sarah's response was calculated. There are questions that show trust, Ayana, and questions that show suspicion. For the first time in my life, Dad called me ungrateful. That word hit differently than Mark's cruelty. This was the man who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd attended every school play. Hearing him say I was ungrateful felt like watching a mask slip off a face I thought I knew. Maybe I am being ungrateful. I thought, maybe I'm imagining things. But then I found the note.It was stuck behind the microwave, written in Sarah's handwriting. Check with lawyer. Signature validity after emancipation. I photographed it with shaking hands. At 19, I knew enough to understand they were planning something for my 21st birthday. Something that required my signature. Page 44. They're not waiting for me to grow up. They're waiting for me to sign up. That weekend, I started teaching myself basic contract law, not through classes or books that would raise suspicion, but through free online resources, legal blogs, articles about trust fund management. I learned about fiduciary duty, undue influence, and something called power of attorney. The more I learned, the more their behavior made sense. I wasn't being protected. I was being prepared. During dinner with the neighbors, Sarah made a comment that froze my blood. Once she's emancipated, their lives will get much easier. Mrs. Peterson looked confused. Emancipated? But she's already. Sarah cut her off quickly. I meant financially independent. You know how it is with young adults. But I knew what she'd meant to say. And I knew she was counting down the days until my 21st birthday for reasons that had nothing to do with celebrating my independence. Page 47. I was protected like porcelain. But porcelain is for display, not decisions. The final piece of the puzzle came from Tommy again. During another family gathering, he approached me with the fearless curiosity of childhood. Are you really going to give them all your money when you get old enough? This time, the adults were ready. They immediately redirected his attention, changed the subject, sent him to play outside. But the damage was done. In the car ride home, I heard Sarah on the phone. She's getting suspicious. We need to move faster. The countdown to my birthday suddenly felt less like freedom and more like a deadline. 67 days until my 21st birthday. They called a family meeting. The documents were thick, wrapped in legal language that looked impressive and official. The cover letter was simple: standard administrative transfer to facilitate fund management. Sarah's presentation was polished. You're mature enough to handle this, Ayana. These papers just formalize what's already happening. We manage things. You benefit from them. I read every word. Twice, buried in the fine print, was a clause that made my blood freeze, granting full authority to amend trust provisions without separate consent. The document would give Uncle Mark power of attorney over my entire trust. Not temporary management, not advisory capacity. Complete control, with the right to modify the terms without my permission. It's just paperwork, Ayana, Mark said when I hesitated. Signing doesn't change anything about your life, but it would change everything about theirs. I told them I needed time to think. The disappointment in their eyes was immediate and sharp. That night, I copied every page of the document. If they wanted my signature, they could explain exactly why they needed it. If they wanted my trust, they should have earned it 20 years ago. I took the copies to Jake, a pre-law classmate who worked at a legal aid clinic. He read everything with the methodical attention of someone who understood exactly what he was looking at. This isn't administrative, he said finally. If you sign this, they don't just manage your money, they own it. The words hit like a physical blow. I felt something break inside my chest, not my heart that had been cracking for years, something deeper. The last thread of hope that I'd been wrong about them. Jake continued reading, his expression growing more serious. Look at this clause about incapacity. If you're ever declared unable to make decisions even temporarily, like during a medical procedure, they get permanent control. And this section about amendments. They can change the terms of your trust without your consent. They can cut you out entirely if they want to. I stared at the papers, seeing them clearly for the first time. These weren't love letters disguised as legal documents. They were transfer papers, a bill of sale for my financial future. When I got home, they were waiting in the living room. Have you thought about it? Sarah asked, her voice artificially casual. I'm still processing the legal language, I replied. It's more complicated than I expected. Mark's jaw tightened. It's not complicated. It's protection. For all of us. But I knew the truth now. It wasn't protection. It was acquisition. Page 52. They call me mature only when they need my signature. They call me naive only when I ask questions. The pressure intensified over the next few weeks. Subtle at first mentions of deadlines, lawyers who needed paperwork filed, tax implications of delay. Then more direct, reminders about family loyalty, suggestions that my hesitation was hurtful, implications that smart daughters trusted their parents' judgment. If she doesn't cooperate, Mark said during what he thought was a private conversation, we'll end up paying more taxes on everything, all because of pride. I was learning that manipulation had a rhythm. Push, retreat, push again. Make the victim feel guilty for resisting, grateful for the brief respites, and ultimately responsible for everyone else's comfort. But I was also learning that documentation was power. Every conversation, every pressure tactic, every slip of the mask went into the quiet book. Page 58. The countdown continues. But now I know what they're counting down to. The surgery was supposed to be routine. Laparoscopic procedure, in and out the same day. I went under anesthesia thinking about weekend plans. I woke up thinking about survival. The anesthesia was wearing off slowly, leaving me in that twilight space between consciousness and sleep. I could hear voices but couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even open my eyes. That's when I heard them. If she died right now, the trust clause would activate. Everything would go to us. She doesn't even need to know. She's already signed half the documents without reading them. Sarah's voice was clinical, discussing my potential death like a quarterly earnings report. Dad just hummed in agreement, the sound I'd heard 1,000 times during my childhood, his casual acknowledgement of plans being made. I lay there, trapped in my own body, listening to them calculate my worth in terms of my absence. When the nurse came to check on me, Sarah handed her a folder. This is her banking authorization, she said smoothly. She prepared everything before surgery, just in case. The nurse sounded confused. We don't typically process financial documents during recovery. Hospital policy requires patients to be fully conscious for any, of course. Sarah interrupted. She's always been thorough about these things, but I hadn't prepared anything. I'd never signed a banking authorization. They'd brought forged documents to a hospital, planning to execute financial transactions while I was unconscious. The mask didn't just slip. It shattered completely. As I drifted in and out of consciousness, I heard fragments of their conversation. The signature looks good. Same as the others. If anyone asks, she requested this before the procedure. She trusts us completely. Always has. When I was finally alert enough to speak, they were gone. The nurse mentioned that my family had stepped out to handle some paperwork but would be back soon. I asked to see what they'd submitted. The nurse looked uncomfortable. I'm sorry, but we can't process financial authorizations without direct patient consent. Your aunt seemed to think you'd already arranged this, but we need you to be fully conscious and willing to sign. Thank you, I whispered. Don't let them back in without asking me first. When I was discharged, I didn't go home. I took an Uber directly to the legal aid clinic where Jake worked. I want to know everything I've supposedly signed, I told the paralegal. And I want to know what they tried to steal while I was sedated. That conversation lasted 3 hours. By the end, I had a case number, a lawyer, and a clear understanding of what undue influence meant in legal terms. My body was healing from surgery, but my silence was about to end. Page 63. They were willing to rob me while I was unconscious. That's not family. That's opportunity. The attorney, Maria Santos, was everything I needed: sharp, experienced, and completely unimpressed by family. Drama disguised as legal maneuvering. She reviewed the documents they'd tried to submit at the hospital. "The signature matches your driver's license," she said, "but the date is wrong. This was supposedly signed 3 weeks ago, but the notarization is from yesterday." "Forgery?" I said. "Attempted fraud," she corrected. "And given the hospital setting, this could be classified as exploitation of a vulnerable person." Maria filed an emergency motion that afternoon. Temporary restraining order on all trust access. Freeze on any new signatures. Court order requiring my presence for any financial decisions. The legal response was swift and decisive. Within 48 hours, their carefully constructed plan was crumbling. But the real victory wasn't legal. It was personal. For the first time in my life, I wasn't protecting them from my questions. I was protecting myself from their answers. The emergency hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I wasn't there to see their faces when they received the court summons, but I heard about it from Maria. "They hired a lawyer immediately," she reported. "Expensive one. Corporate trust specialist. They're taking this seriously." "Good," I replied. "So am I." The evidence was overwhelming. The forged hospital documents, the unsigned power of attorney papers, the pattern of financial secrecy and manipulation. Most damning of all, the recorded conversations I'd been collecting for months. Maria was thorough. She subpoenaed bank records, trust statements, and communication records. What she found painted a clear picture of systematic financial abuse. "They've been skimming from your trust for 3 years," she told me. "Small amounts, dispersed across multiple accounts. The total is significant, nearly $40,000. The money hurt, but not as much as the betrayal. These weren't desperate people stealing to survive. They were comfortable people stealing to upgrade." The court's decision was swift and decisive. Emergency motion granted. Fiduciary authority suspended. Full audit ordered. Criminal investigation recommended. I wasn't in court to hear the ruling. I was in Portland, enrolling in a paralegal program, starting work at a legal aid clinic that helped young adults navigate family financial abuse. The calls started immediately. 17 missed calls before noon. Voicemails that ranged from apologetic to threatening. Text messages cycling through anger, bargaining, and attempted guilt. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I sent one message to the family group chat. "Please confirm receipt. This will be my last direct communication." Then I blocked their numbers and waited for the legal system to do what I'd been too afraid to do, hold them accountable. But there was one call I did answer. It came from a number I didn't recognize. "Ayana, this is Clara Morrison. I'm your birth mother's sister. I've been trying to reach you for years." It wasn't the money that hurt. It was realizing I'd spent half my life protecting people who were only protecting my account. The final court decision arrived on a Tuesday morning. Trust control restored to beneficiary. Unauthorized amendments voided. Fiduciary authority permanently revoked. Criminal investigation ordered for attempted fraud and elder abuse statutes. I read the decision from my new apartment, 3 states away, while getting ready for my first day at the legal aid clinic. The victory felt quiet, like settling into a chair that finally fit. Clara had driven up from California the week before. She brought photo albums, letters, and stories about my birth mother that filled 20 years of carefully constructed gaps. "Your mother left something for you," she said, handing me a sealed envelope. "She made me promise to give it to you when you were old enough to understand what family really means." The letter was dated 6 months after my birth, written in the clear handwriting of someone who knew her time was limited. Most of it was standard mother-to-daughter hopes and dreams, but the last paragraph made me cry. "I hope whoever raises you teaches you that your voice matters, that your questions deserve answers. That love should make you feel safe to be curious, not afraid to ask. If you're reading this and you feel small or silenced, remember, you were born to take up space in this world, not to shrink for other people's comfort." 20 years too late, but exactly when I needed to hear it. The financial recovery was more complicated than the legal victory. The forensic accountant found a trail of unauthorized withdrawals, inflated expense reports, and questionable investment. Decisions that had cost the trust nearly $60,000 over 3 years, but the money was recoverable. The trust was restored. My future was mine again. The personal reckoning was harder. Sarah's final text message was the most honest communication I'd ever received from her. "You were very loved, but now you're alone." I screenshot it and never responded. Love that comes with conditions isn't love. It's just control with better marketing. I made a donation to the Foster Resilience Network with a note, "For those still finding their voice." Then I legally changed my surname to my birth mother's maiden name, not to honor her memory, but to honor my choice to define myself. That evening, I took the quiet book to the fireplace in my new apartment. I burned every page except the first one, the question that had started everything. Why do they look nervous when I ask about my own life? Now I knew the answer. They were nervous because they were lying, and I was dangerous because I was listening. The next morning, I started a new notebook. This one wasn't for recording other people's secrets. It was for documenting my own decisions, my own plans, my own voice. Page 1. Today I choose myself. My name is Ayana Bright. I am no longer theirs.